Hi, welcome to the Cake is a Lie Cakes. Today for our Halloween special we're going to look at how to do heart and lungs. That's part one of it. You can see there's a wee bit more there. I'll also go in to show you how to do some broken ribs and torn flesh round about it just to give it that real good Halloween special. So let's start. Alright, so the cake that we're using here, it's just a vanilla sponge. I'll put the description below for you. It's two 7-inch round tins that I've used for this, and I'm just cutting the top off one of them so as we can sandwich it together with some buttercream. Buttercream that I'm using is just butter, bit of icing sugar and vanilla just to give it a nice bit of flavour, and again I'll put the description below for you. So to get the very basic shape for starters that we're looking for, I'm going to plan where I'm making my cut. So as usual, when I cut anything out of a round like that, I think of what like a clock face. So I'm going to cut in at 6 o'clock as you're looking at it. And then the other two cuts, I'm just lining them off there to see, and it's between the 1 and the 2 o'clock and between the 10 and 11 o'clock. I'm cutting it just over halfway towards me or towards the top of the screen as you're looking at it, and we're cutting out essentially 3 sections. Okay, so that's going to be both lungs, and the bit that I'm removing, the bit at the top as you're looking at it, that will become our heart. So that's a very basic shape that I want to start with for the lungs. The lungs are 2 round, so they come out of a round tin, which is fine. Sometimes I can work with it, this time I can't. So I'm just straightening it off at either side. Also, the way that I've cut it is a triangle, that's not the right shape for me. I'm going to just round that off each side. This again, it's the very rough shape. We will change this a little bit. And the top again, it's too square, so we need to curve that round. So you can see it's starting to look a little bit more like a lung at the moment. And you want to obviously do that on both sides so as they look quite even. Now I'm going to cut into where the heart is. So the heart sits more on one side of the body than the other. So I'm cutting a big section out of this one. We'll put a wee bit back into it after, but I need a space for my heart to go in. The heart is also going to tuck in a wee bit underneath the other lung, so I'm cutting out a section. So all this stuff at the side is good for offcuts if you get people mooching about and they want to eat. To make the heart shape, I'm taking the triangle that we cut out and we discarded earlier, and I'm just cutting an oblong at the moment and starting to shape it round so as it looks like it will fit. It's going to take a wee bit of carving to get it to fit in. Now we're going to go in and do a wee bit more detail of the actual lung shape. So it was one of them I saw it was still a little bit too pointy, so I've evened that off. And I'm doing the same at the other side. I want it to be, the lungs come down to a flatter shape than the way I'd originally cut them out. So the last thing I really want to do now with the shape is I'm going to make a little ledge. So the lung where the heart's going to go, and I cut the big shape out, then I'm going to put another bit of ledge in. Now you could, as you were cutting out, originally leave yourself a section, but I'm quite happy because I've got lots of offcuts to just put another bit in. The heart is going to sit on that once we've iced it and we've got our decoration done, but I need a wee ledge for it so that it sits there. So that's me just putting that back in. The heart's just a little bit too large, so I'm just trimming a bit off so that it all sits in quite flush. It's quite a large cake, we've got quite a lot of it to ice, so this is icing just from the supermarket. It's ivory that I'm using. This is half a block and I've left about a fifth of it to the side. The rest of it you can see I've put a little bit of red in, just a couple of spots of red because I want a very pale pink colour that I'm going to use for the lungs. So that colour I'm perfectly happy with, and you can see it's only just off-white, so it's very, very pale pink. That's what I'm going to use. So next up what we want to do is put butter icing all over the shapes that we've made for our heart and our 2 lungs. So with the pieces now with the butter icing over it, I'm now going to roll out half of the pink icing that I've made for one of the lungs. Just lay it carefully over the lung. It should be obviously a little bit bigger than you're going to need it, and just fold it in and cut off all your excess. And that's that. Really quite straightforward. For the other one, it's just the same. So you roll out the other half that you've got, and this time we have that little ledge, but that's really easy to work in. Just make sure you smooth it off and cut off the edges. And that's your second lung covered. Now it's ready for decorating. Okay, ta-da, that's what we have. We have our 2 lungs ready. Now I'm going to cover the heart. So this was the offcuts of the pale pink icing that we have, and I've added a few more spots of red to it so as that I can make a deeper colour for the heart. Roll it out and then just cover your heart over and press it down just as you did before. Doesn't have to be entirely smooth because the heart's a muscle, so it'll have ridges and so on in it, so I don't have to make it perfect. I'm happy with how that looks. And there we have our basics. So we have our shape of our lungs and our heart, and we have covered it over in our ice, and now we get to do the decorating. So on one of the lungs here, I'm just starting to have some folds. Right, the lung is not smooth. Obviously the icing is really quite smooth there, even though it's sitting over the buttercream, and I've not really bothered trying to make it too smooth. So it has a bit of a wrinkle and some bumps in it, which is perfectly fine. That's what I'm happy with for this particular type of cake. And I'm just going to put a few wrinkles, and I'm going to cut the icing a bit so it looks like folds that you would get in lungs. So I looked up a picture on the internet for what lungs should look like. You can do the same or just copy the types of folds and scores that I'm putting into this. You can have a bit of fun with this. You don't have to copy exactly what I'm doing, obviously. Imagine the marks that are on everybody's individual lungs. I presume it's something like fingerprints, and it would be different one to the other, so no one's going to be able to tell you that what you do isn't along or doesn't look right. So just have a bit of fun. I'm just going around the outsides here just slightly because I feel as though it was looking still too smooth, so I want that to be roughed up a little bit. Okay, so moving on to this other lung, there's many times I say, look, you don't need to have the actual tools that I'm using. You don't need to buy it from Amazon. You can use the side of a spoon. You can use a slightly blunt knife. So for this other lung, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm using just a spoon to show you how easy it is and how much of an effect you can get just from using the spoon. You don't actually need to go and buy something to do these types of cakes. So I don't want the lungs to look like a complete mirror image of each other. I want them both to look quite scored and wrinkly, but also quite random. I don't want them to look like I'm just copying one from the other. So just random scores round about it. And again, going round the outsides to mess it up a little bit or to make it look a little bit more scored. It's too perfect looking. We don't want perfect looking cakes on the Cake is a Lie when we're doing our disgustingly delicious cakes. Right, that's me. I'm happy with that. I don't need to worry about the ledge or anything because that's going to be covered. I'm now just going to make up a little bit of yellow for colouring this. So just a couple of spots of yellow in a little bit of water, a little bit of orange as well, just one spot of that to get this dark yellow slash pale orange colour that I'm going to paint over the lungs with. So as usual, I'm going into where I've made the scores and into the folds because that's what's going to retain most of the colour, and we're going to get a bit of darkness there, so we want a bit of contrast. This is a dry brush that I'm using, so it's not been in the water at all. It's nice and dry, and I'm just going over it to take the excess water off of the cake. I don't want the cake to be soaking wet, but I do want it to have those bits of colour, particularly where I've made the scores. So that's looking good. I'm happy with how that's starting to come on. What I want to do is just make it a little bit darker here. So I've added a bit of burnt umber, a little bit of brown into the mixture I already had to give it a wee bit more depth of colour. And I'm putting that over once again where I've made the scores and the folds. And to remove any of the excess water that went on with it, this is the dry brush. So put the dry brush on and then a little bit of tissue paper to make sure the next time I dab it, it's dry every time I touch the cake with it. The last thing for the lungs is a little bit of purple and black. So I'm putting a little bit of purple powder into this mixture, one spot of black with that, and then not a wet brush and not a dry brush. This isn't a dry brush, it's a wee bit wet, and I'm just putting random dabs around about the cake. So this is just something that when I looked at pictures of lungs on the internet, it looked like it had well, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but this is how I interpret it. This is what it looks like enough to me for the cake is just a few wee random purple black spots. Don't overdo it, just a little bit here and there. And that's my lungs. That's me happy with the lungs. Now to decorate the heart, the first thing I'm going to do is take a little bit of the ivory icing that we had from earlier, just about a centimetre's worth that's going to lay across the top of the heart. You can see the edge that's lying down over the top of the heart is a very ragged edge. That's what I want. I do not want this to look neat at all, and I'm just scoring it in to make it kind of join in. If I was making just a heart cake, a big heart cake, then I'd go into a lot more detail and I would make the 4 sections and so on. But for this, I just need to score up and curve over to just after the 9 o'clock. If this was a clock face, I know it's not quite round. And then going up to the other side, we're coming up between about the 1 and the 2. And I'm just putting this little bit of detail on here. There's not going to be a lot because the heart is just a small piece of this cake, and a lot of this is going to be underneath the lung. I've made up the purple and black that we had a second ago that I used for the lungs. I'm just using that to go once over this whole heart because I don't actually want it to be that pink. I want it to have this colour, and I'm going over the ivory and the pink. All of it's getting this colour. And once again, the dry brush to take off some of that excess moisture. Because I put this wash over the whole cake, it's quite important when you do the dry brush part that you're definitely drying it off with the tissue paper in between so that it does get the dry brush, otherwise you'll just start moving the paint around on it. So that was like an undercoat. For the next coat I want to do into the same mixture of the purple and the black that we had, I'm adding a little bit of red into there so we're getting, it really is quite a brown colour. But I'm just using that to darken it down, and once again the dry brush in between to take off any of the excess liquid on the top there, making sure that I'm drying the brush in between every time I'm dabbing it. Now I have the colour at this stage that I like. I'm going to do a little bit more colour later, but I'm starting to put in a little bit of detail. So at the moment, even though we've put the ivory over it, which is now a kind of blue colour, kind of veiny colour that I wanted, we need some more detail in the heart. We need it to look like a muscle. We need lots of wrinkles in it. So that's all I'm doing. I'm scoring round. Some of the scores are going to be quite deep and some of them are a bit shallower. And I'm doing the same at the top. Now again, if this was a proper heart I was making, I would have the aorta and all sorts of things coming out it. But since most of it's going to be hidden, this is all I'm going to do in terms of the level of detail. I just want it to look in some places a bit redder, so I'm using this scarlet colour now to go over as a last coat into the bits that we've scored down, so we're getting a nice red tone there over the bits of the heart that's the big heart muscle. Hopefully you'll be able to see now if you're doing this at home that by doing it in layers then you're getting all the different shades coming up and through, so that some of it's a bit purpler, some of it's a bit browner, but the overall feel and now colour of the heart is the reddy, dark pink purple colour that I would expect it to look like. And there we have it. You can just fit your heart into your lungs that you have already made, and we have our heart and lungs. So this is part 1, and you can stop there if all you want is heart and lungs, and that's perfectly good cake, and as far as cake goes that's it. But I'm now going to do a bit of extra decorating using some Rice Krispie squares because I want it to look like it's bursting out of a broken rib cage. You can make a Rice Krispie marshmallow mix if you want for this, but I'm just going to use the ones that you buy in the supermarket, and I'm cutting them into L shapes, and this is what's going to make my rib cage that I'm going to put round the lungs. Okay, so I'm lining them up first of all to make sure they're about the size that I want, but they're too wide. So once I've lined them up and I'm happy, I'm just going to take them and I'm going to cut them lengthways up and down so that, well, they're half as wide and I get more ribs round about it. I need to wrap each of the rib cage parts, the bones, in icing. So this is the rest of the ivory icing that we had to the side. You don't need to put any butter icing or anything on this. You can just wrap it round with the icing. Because it's a broken bone or no bit of bone, this isn't going to be neat. I feel like that's my catchphrase. Don't make it neat. I don't want it to be neat. I want it to look like broken bones. So you just cover them all over with little bits of icing. You just need to press it together. It will come together really easily for you. And that's you got all your ribs that you can put round your heart and lungs broken ribs. I just want a little wash on this because ivory's not the colour that I'm looking for. It's too bright. So this is the burnt umber, a bit of brown and a little bit of water, brushing all over. Just one wash, really simple. Then just for a little extra bit of effect here, I've got one more rib that I'm putting at the bottom so it looks like a bit of the rib cage has broken off. Right, now we're on to the home stretch. The very last part that we're going to do is some skin, just a little bit of icing that I'm going to fold round roughly round the rib cage so it looks like there's skin. I want this to look like it's come from a dead body. So I've made a piece of icing here with some red and some blue, and then actually it wasn't going really purple enough, so I added some purple to it. So to that kind of blue purple mix that I've got, I add about 2/3 of that, and then I've added about 1/3 of the dark pink that I had left over from the heart. So this nice grey colour is what I want for the dead looking flesh. So I'm just going to wrap it around the broken ribs that we have there in place. It rolled out in a very random fashion. That's perfect for me. You can just use half on each side. The way that it rolled out though, the edge that you can see at the top there is too uniform looking. So I'll fold it back a little bit here, and I'm also going to tear off the excess. I don't want to cut it. I want to tear off any excess skin that I have at the top there so it looks like torn flesh. Great, so we're almost there. 2 more quick stages. I'm taking a little bit of red into some water, and I'm just putting that round the flesh and also round pretty much little splashes all over the cake so it looks like there's a little bit of blood there. And then for the last stage, we're going to use a bit of raspberry jam. If you've seen some other videos like the dismembered foot, you know I like a bit of raspberry jam if I'm going for a bit of gore. You can just go wild with it, splash it all over the place because it does make it look gory, and at the same time I find it delicious. And there we have your heart and lungs cake. I hope you enjoy.